We're looking for Nadine Moreau. I don't care who you're looking for. You're not seizing anyone from this sanctuary. We're federal agents. We don't need your permission. Actually, you do. This is a house of worship. You need a warrant signed by a judge.
The standoff happened at 11:47 on a Sunday morning. Grace Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn. What started as 4 ICE agents demanding access to a social worker would escalate into 52 congregants forming a human barrier on the church steps. A stunning confrontation captured on security cameras and dozens of cell phones that would go viral within hours. A federal lawsuit that would ultimately award Nadine Moreau $18.9 million. And a legal precedent that would change how federal agents could operate in houses of worship forever. Subscribe because what I'm about to tell you will restore your faith in community solidarity. Let me tell you who they were trying to take. Nadine Moreau was 36 years old, a social worker with New York City Family Services for 11 years. Haitian-American born in Port-au-Prince. Her parents fled to the United States when she was 4, escaping the Aristide regime in 1992. She'd become a United States citizen through naturalization at 19. Certificate filed at home with her passport, voter registration, and the jury duty summons from 2018. She was as American as anyone born on United States soil with documentation to prove it. She was exceptional at her job, the kind of social worker who navigated the city's housing bureaucracy to save families from eviction, the kind who spoke 3 languages, English, Haitian Creole, and French, translating for immigrant families who couldn't advocate for themselves. 63 families saved from homelessness the previous year are alone working weekends without overtime because the work mattered more than the clock. Her performance reviews were flawless. Her colleagues respected her. Her clients remembered her by name. Yet she'd been passed over for supervisor 3 times, always for vague reasons, always in favor of candidates with less experience and weaker results. Her innovations in case management were credited to others in staff meetings. Her voice was routinely overlooked. At Grace Community Baptist, she'd been a member for 8 years, youth ministry leader, food drive organizer, Sunday school teacher to 12 children every week, helping them understand Scripture through stories that made faith accessible. That Sunday morning, she had no idea she was being hunted. Service had just ended at 11:15. 150 congregants, mostly Caribbean immigrants, were moving from the sanctuary to the fellowship hall. Pastor Elijah Thompson, 58, a former public defender turned minister, had led the closing prayer. The atmosphere was warm, voices hummed, kids ran between tables. Nadine was in the Sunday school classroom on the 2nd floor with 12 children ages 5 to 11. They were working on a lesson about the Good Samaritan, cutting construction, paper gluing figures onto poster board. Her 2 nieces, ages 9 and 12, sat at the front table helping younger kids with scissors. She was bent over a little boy's project praising his work when Deacon Marcus appeared at the door. His face was tight with alarm. 4 men in tactical vests were downstairs demanding entry. They were asking for her by name. Nadine froze. The children looked up, sensing the shift in energy. "Miss Nadine," one girl asked, "what's wrong?" She forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Keep working on your posters. I'll be right back." But her hands were shaking as she stood. Nadine descended the stairs slowly. Her nieces followed despite her whispered instructions to stay upstairs. The fellowship hall had gone quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups sat abandoned on tables. 4 men in tactical vests stood near the entrance. Their presence was a violation harsh and jarring against the Sunday morning warmth. The lead agent, his name tag read. Morrison pointed at her the moment she appeared. "Nadine Moreau." She stopped on the bottom step. "Yes, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding your immigration status." The room erupted. Voices rose in protest. Sister Ruth, 74, a breast cancer survivor with a cane, stepped in front of Nadine. "What is this about?" Morrison's hand moved to his hip. "Ma'am, step aside. This is federal business." "I've faced worse than you," Sister Ruth said quietly. "You're not taking her." Pastor Thompson emerged from his office, still in his robes, Bible in hand. He moved through the congregation with calm authority, positioning himself between the agents and Nadine. "Gentlemen, you're in a house of worship. What's the nature of your business here?" Morrison pulled out a folded document. "We have an administrative warrant for Nadine Moreau. We have authority to question and detain her." Thompson examined the paper carefully. His background as a public defender made him meticulous. This is signed by an ICE supervisor, not a federal judge. It's sufficient for our purposes. Not in this ecclesiastical sanctuary, it isn't. Morrison's jaw tightened. Federal authority supersedes religious property. Thompson's voice remained calm, but his words cut like a blade. God's law precedes man's badges. You don't have judicial authorization. You're conducting a warrantless incursion on private property during worship. Leave now or I'll have you removed. Morrison stepped forward. Thompson didn't move. The agent's hand brushed his holstered weapon. That's when everything changed. 52 people moved as one. Sister Ruth behind Nadine, Mother Clara, 68, Esther with her 6-month-old baby on her hip, teenagers from the youth group, elderly deacons, families with children, ages 9 to 81, arms linked, silent, unmoving, absolute. Morrison radioed immediately. We have a hostile crowd at Grace Community Church, 1847 Nostrand Avenue, requesting tactical team backup. The baby began crying. The sound cut through the tension, high-pitched and relentless. It was an audio spine that would continue for the next 30 minutes. Thompson pulled out his cell phone and began live streaming to the denominational headquarters. His voice was steady. This is Pastor Elijah Thompson at Grace Community Baptist. 4 ICE agents have entered our fellowship hall without judicial warrant and are attempting to seize a United States citizen during Sunday worship. I'm documenting everything. Morrison turned to him. Turn that off. First Amendment, Thompson replied. Free exercise of religion. Free speech. I'm exercising both. Another agent moved to flank the congregation. Deacon Marcus and 3 men shifted, blocking his path. The moral barricade held firm. Morrison pointed at Esther, still nursing her baby. Ma'am, you need to move. You're obstructing a federal operation. She adjusted the baby and met his eyes. No. You're risking arrest. Then arrest a nursing mother in a house of worship. See how that play is on camera. Morrison's frustration was visible now. He turned back to Thompson. Everyone here risks felony obstruction charges. Thompson didn't flinch. And you risk violating the Constitution ICE policy on sensitive locations and basic human decency. Which risk concerns you more? The standoff was entering its 8th minute. No one was backing down. Morrison lunged forward, trying to push past Thompson. The deacons locked arms tighter, their bodies forming an impenetrable wall. Morrison's hand went to Thompson's chest, a half shove that didn't move the pastor an inch. You're assaulting me, Thompson said calmly. On camera, in front of witnesses. Continue. Another agent grabbed an elderly man's shoulder, trying to pull him aside. The congregation surged forward, not violently, just closing ranks. The space between the agents and Nadine disappeared entirely. She was now surrounded by a wall of bodies, completely shielded. Nadine's mother, standing near the back, screamed in Creole, "Papran petit mwen, not my daughter." The baby's crying intensified. The mother bounced gently, whispering comfort, but didn't move from her position in the human shield. Sister Ruth, leaning on her cane in the front line, raised her voice. It was strong, despite her 74 years, clear, despite the chaos. Let my people go. The words from Exodus hung in the air, a theological challenge, a moral declaration. Thompson addressed the congregation without breaking eye contact with Morrison. We are standing on sacred ground. We are protecting one of our own. We are exercising our constitutional guarantees to worship without government interference. We will not move. Cell phones were everywhere now. At least 15 congregants were filming from different angles. Every word, every movement, every threat was being documented in real time. Morrison's radio crackled. Backup delayed. Traffic on the BQE. Take 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The agents were alone, outnumbered, on camera, in a house of worship, with no judicial warrant and a crowd that refused to yield. Morrison made one last attempt. Nadine Moreau, if you don't comply, everyone here will be charged. Nadine's voice came from behind the wall, quiet but clear. I'm a United States citizen. I have rights, and I'm not going anywhere without legal counsel. Thompson smiled. You heard her. Now leave our sanctuary before you violate any more laws. The cameras kept recording. Thompson stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Morrison. His voice carried across the fellowship hall with the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years in courtrooms before entering ministry. Let me educate you on jurisprudential precedent, Agent Morrison. Morrison's eyes narrowed. I don't need a law lesson from a preacher. You need one from someone. First Amendment establishment and free exercise clauses. The government cannot interfere with religious worship without compelling state interest and proper judicial oversight. You have neither. Thompson pulled out his phone, scrolling with one hand while keeping his eyes on the agents. Fourth Amendment, Katz versus United States. This is private ecclesiastical property. You cannot conduct searches or seizures without a warrant signed by a federal magistrate. Your administrative document doesn't meet constitutional standards. Morrison's hand returned to Thompson's chest. A push. Harder this time. You're obstructing Homeland Security operations. That's terrorism under the Patriot Act. Thompson didn't move. Violating the First Amendment is tyranny under the Constitution. Which document do you think holds more weight in federal court? He continued, his voice rising. ICE Policy Directive 10029.2, churches, schools, hospitals designated as sensitive locations. Enforcement actions require written supervisory approval. Do you have that approval, Agent Morrison? Silence. You received an anonymous tip, ran a name through a database, and showed up here without verification. That's not law enforcement. That's sectarian persecution dressed as bureaucracy. Deacon Marcus added from the human wall. Nadine Moreau is a naturalized United States citizen, certificate issued 2007, passport issued 2008. What's your probable cause for attempted extrajudicial seizure? Morrison's frustration was boiling over. We have information suggesting fraudulent documents. Based on what evidence? Thompson demanded. An anonymous tip. Anonymous tips require corroboration under Illinois versus Gates. You need independent verification. What corroborating evidence do you have? Nothing. Every camera captured it. Sirens outside. 2 NYPD patrol cars pulled up to the church entrance. 4 officers entered the fellowship hall led by Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran with silver hair and measured movements. What's the situation here? Morrison turned, relief visible in his posture. Immigration enforcement. These people are obstructing federal agents. Williams surveyed the scene. 52 congregants standing in formation. 4 agents surrounded. Cameras everywhere. A crying baby. An elderly woman with a cane at the front line. He turned to Thompson. Pastor, these agents entered our sanctuary without judicial authorization. They're attempting to seize a United States citizen during worship. They violated ICE's own sensitive location policy. They've assaulted congregants. And they're threatening mass arrest to cover their constitutional violations. Williams looked at Morrison. Do you have a warrant signed by a federal judge? We have an administrative warrant. That's not what I asked. Federal judge. Judicial signature. Yes or no? Administrative warrants are sufficient for... No, they're not. Williams cut him off. Not on private property, not in a church. You need a judicial warrant for forced entry or detention in a house of worship. Morrison's voice rose. We have federal authority that supersedes city jurisdiction. Williams stepped closer. And I have municipal authority over trespassing, assault, and disturbing the peace. This is a house of worship. Unless you have a judge's signature, you're trespassing. Leave now or I arrest you for violating New York Penal Law, Section 140.10. A standoff within a standoff. Federal agents versus NYPD. Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon. Williams noticed immediately. Don't. The sergeant's voice was ice. Don't even think about it. The 4 NYPD officers formed a line between the ICE agents and the congregation. Sergeant Williams pulled out his radio. This is 27 Alpha. I need a supervisor at Grace Community Church. We have a jurisdictional dispute with federal agents. Possible civil rights violations in progress. Morrison's face flushed red. You're interfering with a federal operation. You're trespassing in a church without proper authorization. Williams replied. Which one of us do you think the courts will side with? Morrison turned back to Thompson, desperation creeping into his voice. If you don't surrender, Nadine Moreau, I'll detain you for obstruction. Sergeant Williams stepped between them. You'll do no such thing. Thompson raised his phone higher. The live stream was still running. Every camera here is a witness. Choose carefully. An anonymous voice from the congregation shouted, We're live on Facebook, 200,000 people watching. Morrison's eyes darted to the phones, to the cameras, to the news van that had just pulled up outside. Panic flickered across his face. Nadine's 12-year-old niece, holding her own phone, called out clearly, "I got you threatening Pastor Thompson on video. My whole class is watching on TikTok." Morrison's radio crackled again. "Backup still delayed. Accident on the BQE. ETA now 30 minutes. Williams addressed Morrison directly. "You have three options. One, you leave peacefully and coordinate through proper channels. Two, you attempt to proceed and I arrest you for trespassing, assault, and civil rights violations. Three, you wait for your backup and my precinct captain, and we all sit here while the national news covers a federal agency violating constitutional protections in a church." He paused. "Which option sounds best to you?" Morrison looked at his fellow agents, at the congregation, at the cameras, at the NYPD officers blocking his path, at the news crew setting up outside. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, out of legal ground. Thompson's voice was quiet but carried weight. "This is denominational sovereignty. You violated it. You can leave with dignity or leave in handcuffs, but you will leave." Sister Ruth, still leaning on her cane at the front of the congregational shield, quoted scripture one more time. "Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm." 1 Chronicles 16, verse 22. The baby had stopped crying. The silence was deafening. Morrison's hand fell from his weapon. He stepped back. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes," Thompson replied, "it is." A black sedan pulled up outside at 12:18. Rebecca Singh stepped out, briefcase in hand, moving with the urgency of someone who'd raced across Brooklyn after receiving Thompson's call 30 minutes earlier. She entered the fellowship hall and assessed the scene instantly. Federal agents cornered, congregation standing firm, NYPD blocking access, cameras everywhere. "I'm Rebecca Singh, legal counsel for Nadine Moreau. Nobody speaks to my client without my presence and explicit consent." Morrison turned, relief and irritation crossing his face simultaneously. "We're conducting a federal immigration enforcement action." Singh walked directly to him, stopping inches from his face. "You're conducting an illegal incursion into a house of worship without judicial authorization. There's a difference." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Nadine Moreau's naturalization certificate issued October 14, 2007. United States passport renewed 2018. Social Security card verified through E-Verify for 11 consecutive years. Voter registration active since 2008. Jury duty summons from Kings County, 2018. She held the documents up. Morrison wouldn't look at them. "You have no evidentiary basis for this action. No probable cause. No judicial warrant. No supervisory authorization for sensitive location entry. You're not law enforcement. You're bounty hunters with badges, and you just violated every constitutional protection this woman has." Morrison's jaw clenched. "We have information from our database indicating—" "Your database is wrong," Singh interrupted, "and you didn't verify it. You just saw a Haitian name and assumed guilt. That's not investigation. That's a racialized enforcement matrix, and it's actionable in federal court." Morrison stepped back defeated. He looked at his fellow agents, then at the congregation, then at the news crew filming through the window. "We'll be back with proper authorization." Singh smiled without warmth. "Come back and I'll file criminal charges for stalking, harassment, and civil rights violations under Title 42, Section 1983. Try me." At 12:24, the agents walked out. Morrison was last, pausing at the door to look back at Nadine one final time. His expression was pure frustration, humiliation broadcast across his face for every camera to capture. The moment the door closed behind them, the congregation erupted. Not in cheers, in song. A Creole hymn, spontaneous and powerful voices rising in spiritual warfare. "Bon Dieu bon, li fidèle." God is good, he is faithful. The sound filled the fellowship hall, spilling out into the street where the news crew captured it all. 52 voices in harmony, arms still linked, tears streaming down faces, a declaration of faith that had withstood federal intimidation. Nadine collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. The cell phone footage hit social media within minutes. 17 different angles uploaded simultaneously by congregants still shaking with adrenaline. They tried to kidnap her from Sunday school. By 6 p.m., 400,000 views. By midnight, 2 million. By Monday morning, 8 million people had watched federal agents attempt to seize a woman from a church, watched a congregation form a human shield, watched a pastor cite constitutional law while agents touched their weapons, watched NYPD tell ICE to leave or face arrest. The hashtag Protect Sanctuary trended nationally for 3 days. Black churches across the country held solidarity services. Pastors preached sermons about sanctuary, about standing firm, about Grace Community Baptist as a modern example of faith under fire. News outlets analyzed the footage frame by frame. Constitutional scholars praised Thompson's legal citations. Immigrant rights organizations issued statements condemning ICE's warrantless incursion. The narrative was clear and undeniable. A government agency had violated religious freedom, constitutional protections, and its own policies to target a United States citizen in her house of worship during Sunday school. And a community had said no. Singh filed a Freedom of Information Act request the following Monday. The response arrived 2 weeks later, and what it revealed was devastating. The database had flagged Nadine Moreau, deported to Haiti 1998. But it wasn't Nadine, it was her mother. Nadine Moreau, different spelling, different generation, different person entirely. Singh sat across from Nadine and her mother in a conference room, the documents spread between them, and explained the genealogical conflation that had nearly destroyed their lives. Nadine Moreau had come to the United States in 1991, fleeing Haiti after the military coup. She'd been a nurse in Port-au-Prince who'd helped families escape political violence. She'd applied for political asylum. It was denied. In 1998, she was picked up during a workplace raid and deported within 72 hours. Nadine was 7 years old. They were separated for 18 months. 18 months of Nadine living with an aunt in Brooklyn, wondering if she'd ever see her mother again. 18 months of Nadine fighting from Haiti, working with immigration attorneys applying for legal reentry. She'd finally returned in 2000 legally with a green card. She'd rebuilt her nursing career. She'd raised her daughter. She'd become a permanent resident who'd never sought citizenship because the trauma of deportation had made her afraid to trust the system again. And now, 27 years later, ICE had conflated their names. Nadine and Nadine. Mother and daughter. 2 generations collapsed into one algorithmic negligence. The agents had never checked the date of birth. Nadine was born in 1988. The deportation order was from 1998 when she was 10 years old. They'd never verified the social security numbers. Completely different. They'd never compared photographs. Nadine was 63. Nadine was 36. They'd just seen Moreau and Haiti and deportation and assumed they had the right person. Singh's voice was quiet with rage. They spent 11 minutes on database research and 42 minutes terrorizing a church. That's not law enforcement. That's systemic dehumanization. Nadine, sitting beside her daughter, spoke for the first time. Her English carried the musical lilt of Creole beneath it. I was deported for helping people escape dictatorship. My daughter became a social worker to finish the work I started. We both spent our lives helping families survive systems designed to destroy them. She paused, tears forming. And they tried to deport her for my sacrifice, for my name, for being Haitian. Nadine took her mother's hand. The bitter irony settled over all of them. 2 women in helping professions, 2 generations of service, both targeted by the same system they dedicated their lives to navigating for others. Singh closed the folder. We're filing a federal lawsuit. 4th Amendment unlawful seizure. 1st Amendment religious freedom violation. 5th Amendment due process denial. 14th Amendment equal protection and racial profiling. And we're going to make sure this never happens to another family. The congregational shield had protected Nadine's body. The lawsuit would protect her future. The federal complaint was filed 6 weeks later in the Eastern District of New York. 37 pages documenting constitutional violations supported by security camera footage, 17 cell phone videos, and testimony from 52 witnesses. The defendants, Agent Morrison, 3 additional ICE agents, their field office director, regional supervisor, in the Department of Homeland Security. The claims: First Amendment violation of free exercise of religion, theocratic sovereignty violation. 4th Amendment attempted unlawful seizure without probable cause. 5th Amendment deprivation of liberty without due process. 14th Amendment equal protection violation and racial profiling. Religious Freedom Restoration Act, federal interference with religious practice. Damages sought $5 million compensatory for emotional distress and religious sanctuary desecration. $15 million punitive to deter future ecclesiastical incursions. Discovery began immediately, and what it revealed was damning. Internal ICE emails showed agents had been given only a name and location. Nadine Moreau, Grace Community Baptist Church, Sundays. No supervisory approval for sensitive location entry, no verification protocol, just a database match and orders to detain. Agent Morrison's deposition was conducted 4 months after the incident. The transcript would become Exhibit A in Singh's case for systematic dehumanization protocol. Question: did you verify Ms. Moreau's date of birth before entering the church? Morrison: we didn't have that information available in the field. Question: can you pronounce Ms. Moreau's last name for the record? Morrison: Moreau. Question: is that how you pronounced it in your previous deposition? Silence. Question: the transcript from your May deposition shows you pronounced it 6 different ways. Moreau, Mario, Moreau, Democro, and Demoro. 6 different pronunciations in one session. Does that suggest you spent significant time researching this individual before attempting to seize her? More silence. The questioning continued. Singh pushed harder. Question: Agent Morrison, have you ever stated on or off the record that Haitian names are difficult to distinguish? Morrison's attorney interjected, but Morrison answered anyway. Haitian names all look the same to me. Yes, I said that. The deposition room went silent. Singh leaned forward. And yet you attempted to detain a United States citizen based solely on a name that, by your own admission, you cannot distinguish from others. No answer. The defense would later argue good faith error, reliance on database information, limited field resources. Singh's response in her trial brief was 2 sentences. Racism isn't good faith. Negligence isn't a defense when constitutional rights are at stake. The trial began 8 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, immigrant rights advocates, clergy from across the country, former clients of Nadine's who'd driven hours to support her. The security footage played on screens mounted throughout the courtroom. 42 minutes, 4 camera angles, complete audio. The jury watched Morrison's hand move to his weapon. They watched 52 people form a human wall. They watched a crying baby, a 74-year-old woman with a cane, a pastor citing constitutional law, while federal agents threatened arrest. A constitutional scholar from Columbia explained why warrantless incursions violate the First Amendment, why ICE's own policies designate houses of worship as sensitive locations requiring heightened scrutiny. They spent 11 minutes reviewing database information and 42 minutes terrorizing a congregation. That ratio tells you everything about their priorities. Nadine testified on the 6th day. She spoke clearly without theatrics, her voice carrying the weight of intergenerational trauma perpetuation. My mother was deported in 1998 for helping families escape political violence in Haiti. She was a nurse who risked her life so others could survive. She came to America seeking asylum and was denied. She was deported when I was 7 years old. She paused, composing herself. I became a social worker to finish the work she started, to help families navigate systems designed to break them, to use my citizenship, the citizenship she fought to give me, to protect others the way she protected people in Haiti. Her voice cracked, and federal agents tried to deport me for her sacrifice, for her name, for being her daughter. They didn't verify, they didn't check. They just saw Moreau and Haiti and decided I was guilty. Nadine's 9-year-old niece testified next. The judge allowed it after confirming she understood the oath. She sat in the witness box, small and serious, and answered Singh's questions in a voice that barely carried. What did you see that Sunday? Men with guns came to church. They wanted to take Aunt Nadine. Everyone stood in front of her. I was scared. Why were you scared? I thought God's house was safe. They broke that. The courtroom was silent. Nadine Moreau, Nadine's mother, testified on the 8th day. She was 63, a nurse at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, a green card holder who still carried the trauma of deportation 27 years later. I was deported for being Haitian, for helping others, for existing in a system that didn't want me. 27 years later, they tried to deport my daughter for the same reason, because her name sounded like mine, because we're Haitian, because we've spent our lives helping people, and that makes us targets instead of assets. She looked directly at the jury. When does it end? When does my family stop paying for the crime of being born in the wrong country? The defense presented no witnesses. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. When they returned, the foreman was a white man in his 60s, a retired accountant from Long Island. His hands shook as he read the verdict. Liable on all counts. First Amendment violation, yes. Fourth Amendment violation, yes. Fifth Amendment violation, yes. 14th Amendment violation, yes. Religious Freedom Restoration Act violation, yes. Compensatory damages, $4,900,000. $4 million of that specifically designated for religious sanctuary desecration, a recognition that the violation of sacred space carried its own unique harm. Punitive damages, $14 million designed to deter future warrantless ecclesiastical incursions and punish the systematic dehumanization protocol that had targeted Nadine. Total $18,900,000. The largest religious freedom award in immigration enforcement history. The jury foreman's eyes were wet as he sat down. 2 jurors were openly crying. Judge Patricia Hernandez addressed the defendants directly. Her voice was measured but carried the weight of judicial condemnation. You entered a house of worship without proper authorization. You attempted to seize a United States citizen without probable cause. You violated your own agency's policies. You ignored constitutional protections. And when confronted with evidence of your errors, you proceeded anyway. You've dishonored your badges and your country. This verdict is not just compensation. It's a statement that such conduct will not be tolerated in a society governed by law. Nadine wept. Her mother held her. The congregation members in the gallery stood silently, hands over hearts, as the judge dismissed the jury. Restorative jurisprudence had been delivered. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Agent Morrison and the 3 agents who'd entered Grace Community were terminated within 30 days of the verdict. Their field office director was reassigned to administrative duties. The regional supervisor was demoted and placed under review. But the policy changes were more significant than individual punishments. ICE issued a revised policy directive 10029.3 within 60 days. Churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, all houses of worship now required written approval from a federal judge before any enforcement action. Not supervisory approval, judicial approval, a sanctuary jurisprudence precedent that elevated religious spaces to the highest level of constitutional protection. Anonymous tips required corroboration through at least 3 independent verification points. Social Security number, date of birth, photographic comparison minimum standards. Database matches alone were insufficient for detention. Body cameras became mandatory for all sensitive location operations. Every frame documented, every word recorded. The Department of Homeland Security issued a formal apology to Grace Community Baptist Church and to Nadine Moreau, acknowledging constitutional violations and systemic failures in enforcement protocols. Nadine used $5 million of the settlement to establish the Sanctuary Defense Network, an ecclesiastical defense infrastructure providing legal resources, training, and rapid response support for houses of worship facing federal enforcement actions. Within 18 months, the network had trained 487 congregations across 32 states. Grace Community Baptist became a training center, hosting monthly workshops that drew clergy and lay leaders from across the country. The fellowship hall, where 52 people had formed a human wall, now hosted seminars on sacred resistance architecture. Nadine Moreau, Nadine's mother, left her nursing position at Brooklyn Methodist to work full-time with the Sanctuary Defense Network. Mother and daughter side by side, building the transgenerational healing praxis they'd both been denied in their own lives. The inheritance they'd almost lost became the legacy they chose to share. 2 years after the verdict, Nadine stood on a stage at the National Council of Churches annual conference in Washington, D.C. 3,000 clergy and lay leaders filled the convention center. The security footage from Grace Community played on screens behind her as she spoke. They thought a Haitian name in a database was sufficient, a name they couldn't pronounce, a name they conflated with my mother's because they couldn't be bothered to verify a date of birth. They thought that was enough to seize me from Sunday school, from my sanctuary, from the house of worship, where I'd found community and faith and safety. She paused, her voice strengthening. We proved a congregation's faith is insurmountable. 52 people, ages 9 to 81, stood between badges and injustice. That's not just solidarity. That's sanctified resistance. The audience erupted in applause. She waited for silence. My mother fought tyranny in Haiti. She risked her life helping families escape dictatorship. She was deported for that courage. I fight tyranny here in a country that claims to be a refuge using the citizenship she fought to give me. That's the inheritance they tried to steal. The inheritance we reclaimed together. She closed with words that would be quoted in houses of worship for years to come. If they come for your neighbor, you stand. If they violate sacred space, you resist. If they demand compliance with injustice, you refuse. That's what Grace Community taught me. That's what we're teaching the nation. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Sunday morning at Grace Community Baptist Church. The fellowship hall hummed with familiar warmth. Nadine stood in the second-floor Sunday school classroom, the same room where Deacon Marcus had found her 2 years earlier. The children were older now, wiser, carrying the memory of that day like a badge of their own resilience. A brass plaque hung on the wall near the door. Here we stood, February 16th, 2020. Here we protected our own. Nadine sat in the back pew of the classroom, watching her daughter teach, smiling with a peace that had taken 27 years to find. Grace Community had become known as a safe place. Families came because they had heard the story, because they knew this congregation would protect them. Nadine looked out the window at the street below. No agents, no threats, just sunlight and safety and the sound of children learning that faith means standing firm. She'd been overlooked. She'd been targeted. She'd been vindicated. Now she was teaching the next generation what resistance looks like. If this story reminded you that communities are powerful when they refuse to back down, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who needs to remember that standing together changes everything. Until next time, stay safe, stay faithful, and keep resisting injustice.